Welcome to Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans. Governor Bill Walker has invited Alaskans from across the state to convene in Fairbanks to participate in discussions of what our citizens want government to provide and how we'll pay for that in years to come. In this session, Bill Dann, president of Professional Growth Systems, will define some operating terms and lay out the methodology and format to be used throughout the conversation. Then we'll hear Pat Pitney's general budget overview. Pitney is the director of the Office of Budget and Management and Budget in the Governor's Office.
Good morning, everyone.
You're watching Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans, made possible with support from the State of Alaska Office of the Governor.
Lieutenant Governor Malott, and to all of you. Thanks for bringing Alaskans together this weekend to kick off Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans. And to our audience online and on TV, thanks for joining us as we think and work together, thinking about how to right-size state government and how we're going to pay for it. There'll be two presentations this morning. They're on the website and on 360 North. Now, for those of you who were on the transition teams last November, do you remember how much interaction there was with the group? Well, this weekend's structure is a little bit different as we move through the discussion from right size to revenue options. And so to go over the process for today, how we're going to work in the different groups, how to move the conversation forward, please welcome the founder and president of Professional Growth Systems, Bill Dann.
Good morning. Thank you, Brian, and good morning. So how was that first night return to dorm life? Laughter and some groans. Okay. So as the governor talked about last night, the 3 days is about what's our vision of the future for Alaska, most especially what's the role of state government in that future, and having defined that role, given the sobering news that Governor Knapp gave us last night, how are we going to go about paying for the Alaska that we want? So I want to take you through kind of an overview of the design. There's a tremendous amount to accomplish, and we've tried our best to be sure that we get the product that the governor wants from the session, and everyone has ample opportunity to participate. The other thing I would remind everybody about is that, as the governor said last night, and also the lieutenant governor, this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end point. So in many ways, what we're establishing here is, having heard what you've heard last night, kind of what's the baseline point of view of people from all around the state on how we go about this. And then we'll continue that conversation and the journey to get from here to there. Hope this works. Oh, good. So there are three objectives that we're trying to accomplish. The first is to define, given that we're shifting from the government that we want to have to the government that we want to afford, what is the right size of state government going forward? And we're going to ask you to examine in your groups which of the services currently being provided by state government do you deem to be critical, meaning they're essential that they go on regardless of the fiscal environment, of medium need being we need that if we can afford that, and the last are low level of need, meaning that those may be things that we go without until the fiscal climate changes. We're then going to ask you in the groups this morning to give us your assessment as to what how you deem the current level of service to be, which is to say the current level of funding for that effort. Is it not enough, about right, or too much in your view? Now, that's a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time, and there's a lot of familiarity with the services, particularly with the stakeholder groups. You're going to have as resources to that conversation commissioners from the departments that are germane to your groups. So we're hoping that with them as a resource, you can quickly move through it. At the end of that exercise, which is at the end of today, we'll be able to calculate, using Commissioner Hoffbeck and his crew, a number for the right size of government going forward, based on the majority view of all of the groups. So at the end of the day, we will have a new calculation of the fiscal gap. And tomorrow's exercise is, how do we go about filling that gap? So you're going to be in groups tomorrow at random, and your assignments are on the sheets in front of you, to determine what's the best way to pay for it. At the end of the day, Commissioner Hoffbeck's going to be going through a fascinating interactive model around a lot of the options that Gunnar Knapp talked about last night, but also many more that they've prepared for what are the options for financing this gap. And tomorrow, you'll have a revenue resource person in your room that will be able to calculate, when you make a decision that there's a revenue option that you think should be exercised, we'll be able to look at what's the impact of that on the closure of the fiscal gap. And you'll be working that model until you either close the fiscal gap or give up trying. I mean, we just can't get there from here. And any outcome is acceptable. We really want to know your point of view, and it may be that it's a bridge too far at this point in time. We'll see how that goes. The third objective is to recruit as many of you as we can in the process of continuing this conversation throughout Alaska, because this is something, as the Lieutenant Governor and Governor stressed, that we want as many Alaskans as possible to participate in. Okay. So I want to go over some operating definitions. Your facilitators and chairs will be going over this in more detail, but just kind of give you an orientation. For the value of the service to you as a citizen going forward, these are the definitions of critical, medium, and low. These will also be available in your session. And then for the level of service, meaning the level of funding for that function, these are the definitions of not enough, about right, and too much. So those are the operating definitions, and you'll be voting as to which of those options you think are true in your group. So we've got two sessions this morning around the value of services. The first group is by stakeholder based on either your participation in the transition conference in November or your expressed interest. And the second group will be randomly selected, because one of the things we're interested in seeing is there a difference between the stakeholder point of view regarding the value of services and that of the public at random. These are the groupings. Those of you that were at the transition conference, remember that there were 17 groups. We considered that to be unwieldy for this exercise. So we've collapsed some of the groups into the 7 that you see here. So as I mentioned earlier, for the right size of government discussion, you're going to be seeing a list of services in the functional areas that your group is working on. Some of you may be very familiar with those services and have no questions. Some of you may want to know what's included in that, where do you do it, has the volume of that increased or decreased, what would happen if we didn't do it anymore. And as a resource to you for that discussion, there will be commissioners in each of your groups to help answer those questions. They'll begin with a brief presentation about what those services include. We decided to take out this calculation of the increments of 10 to 20%. We're simply going to be asking you whether you think the funding is enough, too much, or about right. And that's just in the interest of time to give you more time for your discussions. As I said, this afternoon, we'll have a calculation based on your work today of what that new budget number will be, and there'll also be a long presentation by Commissioner Hoffbeck on the revenue options for you to be thinking about this evening, so that you can go to work in the morning. There's also going to be an opportunity this evening for those of you that are so inclined to actually play with the model a little bit on computers that we're going to have here on campus. All right, I think we've covered all of that. And we talked about you'll be participating in 3 groups as formal groups. One is a stakeholder, one is a randomly assigned, and then you'll be participating also in a group on Sunday that'll be randomly assigned on Closing the Gap. Now, you may have noticed out in the ballroom that we have posted banners for the 7 functional areas. What's going to happen is that all of the work from today is going to be recorded on flip charts, your voting and your judgments. It's going to be brought over here into the Wood Center cafeteria area, and you'll have an opportunity to walk about and examine what the other groups came up with, because you may have interest in areas that you weren't able to participate in your groups. Again, there will be commissioners there as resources to answer any questions, and there'll be an opportunity for you on an ongoing basis wandering around the groups to enter questions or comments on a form that will be provided. And all those comments will be captured and be part of the proceedings of the session. So, any questions before we get rocking and rolling? All right. So next up, I want to introduce Pat Pitney. As you learned last night, for those of you that didn't know, Pat is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. She's also the chair of the Fiscal Stability Task Force of the Cabinet that's been working on the design of this. She has been an absolute joy to work with, despite being the point person and working with the legislature on the budget. So it's with great pleasure I introduce Pat Pitney.
It's nice to be home. So yeah, we were hoping that this was a month and a half after the end of session, and we'd have all the time to really focus it and prepare for it, and not the case. So similar to Gunnar, I'm going to move the flag. So my job is to send you out for your conversations. I'll recap a little bit about what Gunnar was talking about and the situation that we face right now. I think the biggest thing is everything about this presentation is focused on this fiscal year, but I'll remind you again at the end of this isn't about fiscal year 16 as much as it is about the state we want 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. So we're just using this fiscal year to frame the discussion. So please keep your mind forward-looking. So we came together as a cabinet and talked about what was important for us from a purpose and priority and value perspective. And our values are strong. And the very first one, and the first and foremost, is public trust. And this particular event and the events we'll hold throughout the summer and fall really exhibit our interest in getting the highest level of public trust and getting the highest level of involvement in the issues that are going to affect Alaskans. Respect, persistence. We don't think this is going to be an easy issue to solve, but we're in it for the long haul. Service and teamwork. We are a team that want to serve Alaska, and that's why we're here. The purpose, we want to energize Alaska in more than one way. Our spirit, but also take advantage of everything we can that Alaska has to offer. And focus, I think both the Lieutenant Governor and Governor talked about this last night. We want to improve the life of every Alaskan. A few of the visions: transforming energy production, healthy and safe families, and healthy communities. This includes education. Very high interest in education in that particular bullet. And then, of course, a sustainable budget. How do we get from here to there? So what does a budget mean? It really does mean a balanced budget. We were fortunate or unfortunate to get a budget passed by the legislature this year that wasn't balanced, and it was a $5 billion spending plan with a $2 billion checkbook. That's why they're kind of still doing what they're doing. So we hope that they can come up with that other $3 billion. But it's a policy document. What's important to us? What do we want Alaska to be? And so be thinking when you're in your groups about the budget will represent what Alaska is going to be. So help us describe what we want our Alaska to look like. So framing our total, we have about a $12.3 billion total budget. It's made up of federal funds, permanent funds, other state funds, that's things like AHFC and ADA, and designated general funds, that's tuition and fees, fishing license, fee for service, DMVA, or not DMVA, DMV, car registrations, things like that. So, it's real money. It's $900 million, but small relative to the whole. And then it's the unrestricted general fund. And that's where we'll be focusing. That's the total spend plan we have. And this is the problem we face. Of that spend plan, or of that total expected revenue, we're short almost $3 billion in that general fund category. Dropping down to just what the general fund pays for. Formula programs, that's K-12, Medicaid, and a few other programs, mostly in the health and social services area. Agency non-formula, that's everything like fish and game, university, transportation, but it's not funded by the legislature, but not in a formulaic way. Then there's the capital budget. This is as small as the capital budget has been in 15 years. Then payment and obligations. Gunnar talked about this last night. Debt service, retirement payments, oil and gas tax credits. So of that, only 40% is covered by our annual revenue. So that's what we pay for with our unrestricted general funds. That's stuff that we can choose to do with. So we have consistently lowered our call on unrestricted general funds for the last several years. It did come up from 2006 up, but starting in 2013, it's dropped down. So the light blue bar on 2015, that was a $3 billion deposit into the retirement fund from the CBR. So, but we went from 8 billion to 7 billion to 6 billion, and now we're at 5 billion. And but again, going back to here, the pieces and parts of that, actually, I've got a better graph next. So that's the part of that 5.1 billion. So I'm going to kind of depart here to some of the things that we've been doing. To move the dial from 6.1 to 5.1 or 5.1 down is, there's multiple things. And people say, well, just get more efficient. And we plan to get more efficient. Every commissioner here is going through internal departmental efficiencies, but we're also looking at cross-departmental efficiencies. So we asked public and employees when we first came into office, what their savings ideas were. We've looked internally now that we've been on for a few months, and we've all gotten together and says, what are the things that are cross-departmental that we really want to do that could provide efficiencies? So we're looking at the travel process. We're looking at IT consolidations. We're looking at centralization of fine collections, centralization of loan programs, process improvement, and then unifying our facilities management across the state. These things are important, and we're working hard at them. In total, 30 to 70 million in the grand scheme against a $5.5 billion or $5.1 billion total. So wanted to let you know we are working on these. It's important, and we'll continue on them. But framing a little bit about what efficiencies will gain us, and that really what we're talking about here is about the services we want going forward. So we looked at how does Alaska's budget compare to other states? And if you remember last night, Gunnar had a graph that shows income tax and sales tax that are paid in other states. And if we colored these dots, Alaska would be the only dot that wasn't colored with a broad-based tax of income tax or sales tax. So, and what this graph shows is, based on population, what would be the appropriate size of government if we were just at the average of all other states. And it says, if we dropped Alaska down to that line, it says our budget should be about $5.3 billion. So if you take the big four states out and you drop Alaska down to that line, it would say Alaska should be about $4.8 billion. So if you're looking at our state expenditures, even though we pay, from a state perspective, a lot of services that are normally done in a local, we're not very far from the line. This is at our peak of spending 2009 to 13, so we look far from the line here. But today we're at $5.1 billion. And then also, if you look at where we are compared to ourselves, if you look back into that trough, the late 90s, early 2000s, when our state spending was the lowest it's been because of no new revenues over about a 12-year period. If you look at that and say, where do we stand today? After the cuts made in this last year, we're within, among agency operations, $200 million of where we were in the lowest years, 1999 to 2001. So again, using two comparisons, they're broad-based, they're not scientific, but we're not very far off. But here's the challenge. Gunnar was optimistic, I think, at $70 a barrel oil. Our Commissioner of Revenue said, yeah, we probably should use $70 barrel oil. As the conservative budgeter, I'm looking what happens if it's $50 a barrel oil. So the three lines, the vertical lines, are our state budget. The squiggly lines are the revenue we can expect at different prices of oil. It's $50 a barrel oil. The next line up is $80 a barrel oil, and the next line up is the revenue projection. Regardless, at whatever price of oil you look at, it doesn't cover our state spending. The slow clicker. So, and among that $5.1 billion graph, and we're talking about formula programs and payments and obligations, the top three, education, payments and obligations, that's debt service, retirement, and oil and gas tax credits is the second bar. Third bar is health and social services. Those three pieces are $3.6 billion. Agency operations and the capital budget is the remainder. We have $2.2 billion of revenue. So So these will be big topics today. Okay, here's the spread. And this is what I wanted to get to send everybody out into their groups. Remember when you're looking at your service areas, we have the big ones: education, payments and obligations, health and social services. Then you get kind of the big ones that are still small, or smaller relatively speaking: university, corrections, and transportation. Then you have public safety, law, natural resources. So when you're in your groups, each of you have your groups, each one of these bars will be represented in the group at a service level. Be thinking about the magnitude that your group has on the total budget. And understand, that service may be vitally important and it might be small, or that service might be vitally important and it's this big. So be thinking about the scale as you walk into your groups today, and understand, what you're talking about when you're talking about law. It's, all the way to the right. You're looking at the governor's office. It's all the way to the right. Looking at education, it's big. So keep that in mind. And with that, I'll leave you with this. If you didn't get a new sheet of assignments this morning, look for the new sheet of assignments this morning for where you're going. Use your commissioners as your resource for questions. Use each other. The number of people in here that have dealt with the fiscal situation in the state over many, many years, we have tremendous expertise. Chancellor Rogers, Cliff Groh, Scott Goldsmith is here, Brad Keithley is here, Gunnar Knapp. Use the people who have dealt with this situation, understand it, use the expertise that is here, but also use your fellow group members to really understand what's important to us. And with that, enjoy good conversations.
Well, thank you, Pat. And now to go over the 7 stakeholder groups, I'd like to introduce the chairs of each of those groups. And I'd like to ask the chairs to stand when I call your name so people will know who you are. So the Resources and Environment Group, which is Natural Resources, Fish and Game, and DEC, Robin Brenna will be leading that group. For Health and Social Services, Karen Perdue. For Education and Training, which would be the Department of Education and Early Development, University of Alaska, and the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, Bob Williams and Mary Pete. For Economic Development and Infrastructure, Department of Commerce, Community Economic Development, and Department of Transportation and Public Facilities, Jim Dodson and Tim Navarre. For Public Protection, Department of Public Safety, Corrections, and Military and Veterans Affairs, April Ferguson. For Government, which is Law, Department of Administration, Governor's Office, Liz Medicine Crow. And for Finance and Capital, including Revenue, Payments and Obligations, and Capital, Dennis McMillian and Aaron Harrington. So now the work begins. For those of you online, the participants in Fairbanks are going to head to classrooms to begin the right size of government exercise. For the governor, lieutenant governor, legislators, public, media, you can roam between all 7 of the classrooms in the Greening Building and listen in. There'll be places in each room where you can record questions or comments for the chair to read during breaks. And for participants after the morning sessions, we'll have a group photo session at noon. As you leave Greening, you'll be directed to the photo location. And then we'll come back here to Wood Center Ballroom for reports after lunch, reports from the groups on the right size of government. And again, if you didn't get a new handout today with group assignments, pick one up as you leave the room. For those online, we'll begin with the live web stream at 1:30 p.m. with those reports. So for those who don't know where the Greening Building is, if you head down the stairs and out the building to the south and go to the left, tall building, and there will be people to guide you to those classroom assignments. Pat has another announcement.
I have two alibis. I didn't know that Cheryl would get here so quickly this morning. Cheryl Frasca with Commonwealth North is another one of the people that have spent a lot of time on this issue, a prior budget director. And Diane Kaplan here with the Rasmussen Foundation has done some work on this issue as well, and I invite you to talk to them. Then the other thing is the service descriptions that you'll be seeing in your rooms, if you're tech savvy, those descriptions are all online. So loop back to the website that we have set up for this. You can use a lot of the material on that website to help draw more information as well. So there's that, and there's some information on the tax options that you'll see, or revenue options that you'll see. There's also some printouts out there on revenue options going forward. So.
Well, thank you then, and please proceed to the breakouts.
You're watching Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans on 360 North and 360north.org, made possible with support from the State of Alaska Office of the Governor.